Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Biohacking Beauty podcast. My guest today is the amazing Greg Spivak, who's a personal friend and someone I really admire. And it was very important for me to have him on a conversation on the podcast. He's an optimal health coach and one of the first certified Wim Hof method instructors, which is super impressive. Greg's purpose in life is to help others to pursue their optimal self, and he believes that the foundation of this is rooted in the development and expression of their consciousness. Tools such as meditation, breath work, psychedelics, and other optimal living practices are some of the ways that Greg works to help improve the well-being of his fellow man and his clients. And he has a wonderful place that he works out of in Santa Barbara. I wanted to bring him in today to really connect between kind of the optimal way of living, how we can take care of our body, our mind, our health, and obviously have it translate into skin health eventually. But this is more of a, let's say, a holistic conversation. And the first time we talk about psychedelics on this podcast. A few takeaways of this conversation is really the intersectionality between our physical appearance and physical health, our emotional and spiritual health, and some tools that we can use in order to link consciousness, mind, body, spirit kind of modality. So this is just a taster. It's a really easy conversation, which I loved having, and I feel like we would definitely go back and revisit that later on. It is very important for me to bridge the connection between the way we live our lives and the kind of path that we follow in our health, have that support our skincare journey or our skin longevity journey, because they are connected. The skin essentially is an organ, definitely is an organ that we can assess its health sometimes by looking at it. Obviously, research supports the fact that we can assess skin health by looking at it and by guessing someone's biological age by looking at their skin, etc. But there are many ways to affect the skin and how it ages that are not only topical. So this was a little service to anyone who's listening to this podcast, and also an entertaining podcast, I feel, to listen to as a whole. Before we dive into today's episode, I first want to share a review from one of our valued Biohacking Beauty listeners. So we have someone saying that they enjoy listening to me, to Amitay, and find him and the guests very informative, that they are instilling and promoting healthy habits. And I noticed that I enjoy guidance and navigation in the health optimization in general, and the guests and hosts are truly inspiring. So thank you for that. Now, if you haven't done so already, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take 2 seconds out of your day to leave a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Even a one-word review would be amazing. Your rating and reviews greatly help with the growth of this podcast, which helps us educate more people. Okay, now let's get into today's conversation with my good friend Greg Spivak. Okay, Greg Spivak, welcome to the Biohacking Beauty podcast.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So I really liked what you posted recently. You posted, "Understand this. It's all an interplay between the darkness, the fear of dying, and the thrill of life. In finding the thrill of life, we are creating beauty. And in creating beauty, we become happy and we gain meaning." So obviously, this is the Biohacking Beauty podcast. So that quote really spoke to me. How did you? What is it? Is it your quote? Is it someone else's?
Oh, I heard that. I heard that on a podcast. It really spoke to me because I've been on this path of consciousness and just this path of like understanding what it's about and my place in the cosmos and all that in the past period of my life, and it comes really down to recognition of beauty. When you recognize beauty in the world, which is all around us, you can find it. Piece of furniture and a flower outside, the way a bush grows. You'll always see it if you actually look for it. We get so distracted with the hustle bustle and the bullshit of life that we don't ever miss it. We kind of gloss over it, and that sort of dulls us, and we become sort of robotic and ultimately unhappy. The more you can witness the beauty of the world, the happier you're going to be. And there's a saying that I like to say that I got from someone else, a book I read. It says that beauty needs a witness, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not beautiful unless it's witnessed. And there's a lot of like femininity and masculinity kind of foundation with that as well. But it just kind of, it's something I've been turned on to lately. And more beauty you see and experience in your life, the more meaning your life has.
Yeah, I think I watched Nick Kroll stand up recently, and he was kind of making fun of how kids don't have a good vocabulary. So
Mm.
he's like, the eye was itchy. So he's like, my eye is spicy. Called everything spicy, everything uncomfortable. Called it spicy for a while, and it's funny, like what you're describing is some people wouldn't understand if you didn't use the word beauty. Some people wouldn't really understand why, or it wouldn't come to them, innately, to use the word beauty to describe the way you experience life, even if your experience makes you feel good. And it almost like it needs another word in my eyes, which is separate from what we call like classical beauty, which is maybe like understanding of symmetry, right? Like if we think of what is a
Sure.
beautiful face or a beautiful body for that matter, it's more about lack of imperfection rather than some experience that makes you feel good necessarily.
Yeah. That's very accurate. It's definitely a very kind of like a romantic way of explaining it. There's nothing wrong with that. We kind of I feel like times in the past, especially if you look at old architecture and like this from the 1700s and whatnot, everything was very beautifully as ornate. It's very grand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you look at, you go in cities, it's ugly. Everything that's not really, it's not beautiful. It's real squared and just kind of like that minimalistic look. There's a certain quality to that, sure, but like overall kind of beauty of and essence of things, I feel like as we've gotten more and more industrialized, it's kind of fallen by the wayside. It's almost deemed irrelevant when it's very relevant. It's very crucial for living like a good life, a happy life.
Yeah, I resonate with that a lot, revolving around what we experience as beauty, something that has substance. I mean, I think if you part of what is charming to me with old cars, old buildings, whether it is a let's say a body that looks like it is a beautiful body,
Mhm.
all of them I think have some romantic idea of something that took a lot of work to achieve, you know. And maybe when we look at buildings nowadays, we know that everything was, the ideas behind it, how it was built. Um, it's way more automated. There's less like
Yeah.
craftsmanship
Hmm.
associated with it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And a lot of
So
that's just for the sake of, like I said, industrialization and sake for sake of profits and whatever else.
yeah.
It's almost like it's cheapness. It's like we kind of live in a society where we want like just a cheap, easy dopamine hit, and it's almost like taking like something that's more craftsmanship, takes more like time and effort. Is we want the shortcut to whatever it might be,
Mhm.
happiness or success. And it's not really how it works. If you want feel experience the richness of life.
Yeah, I mean, my 2023 resolution is to have a different relationship with dopamine, aside from other things as well. But the more I go into, and I'm sure we're going to talk about, physical strain on the body, training, um, mindfulness, etc. But the more I go into those realms of a long play to have a more fulfilled life, the more I do not like the role dopamine plays within my
Sure.
experience of life. It's almost like dopamine is not a feel good hormone. It feel good mechanism. It is more of a give me more mechanism. The more I try to,
100%.
so my resolution is basically to work on, so basically like to change my relationship with that demand of dopamine, to get more of it and to try to stray away from it. um, Within that realm, you have so many hats. One of those hats is working with a company that does psychedelics, which as I told you before, we don't really work. We didn't really speak on psychedelics on this podcast before. How do you experience psychedelics? Is it something that you use daily, or is it what is your relationship with that exactly?
Just real quick, I wanted to add something to what you were saying about the dopamine, the new resolution for the new year.
Mm-hmm.
There's another great saying that I know I try to remind myself of is that everything in moderation, including moderation. So you're right. So sometimes if you're overdoing it, right, and you're constantly endlessly scrolling on Instagram, getting this cheap dopamine hit after cheap dopamine hit. Obviously, that's not good. But sometimes you blow the lid off of it and go get yourself a bunch of dopamine at once. But like have the control to reel it back in, right? Anyways, psychedelics. How do I view psychedelics? How do I work with psychedelics? Psychedelics is definitely a hot topic in today's society. You see it, being the new studies coming out from Johns Hopkins, NYU, Cal Berkeley, all over the place. You see Apple News writing articles saying, moms on shrooms and like that. See, all kinds of different articles, from everywhere. From every major newspaper, magazine is talking about this, right? It's very trendy right now. See clothing, out there with mushrooms on it. Everyone wants to be tied into this, right? It's a wave, essentially. And it's cool. It's very cool to see people be more open to this and becoming much more of a popular topic in our society, and getting a lot more validation. But I look at psychedelics as it's a continuation of consciousness. You work, people, associated with hallucinating, right? And what's the hallucination? If you were to look at the world through my eyes, or to look at the world through your eyes, it'd be hallucinating because my ego created a framework, my fabric of reality of like my beliefs and thought patterns and truths that might be a little bit different than yours. So when you dissolve your ego and basically look at things from a more blank slate, able to have a new perception of reality. So basically, if I were to look at the world through your eyes and you through mine, you would be hallucinating. So psychedelia, when you're in a psychedelic state, essentially it's an altered state, and it's a state of consciousness where ego, which I alluded to before, is now downregulated. And why this is a good thing, because this mirrors when you're in a meditative state. When you're in a state of meditation, ego, which is essentially your mind, and which is essentially there to keep you alive and not to keep you happy. It's a purely survival sort of thing. It's meant to remember the past to give you a better shot at survival in the future, and predict the future, give you a better shot at survival in the present. So both those states are past and future, not so much, and not really in the present. And you only can be happy and experience life and like the qualities of the beauties of this world when you're in the present moment. So the more present you can be, the more alive you can be, the happier you can be. So that's why we meditate. We meditate because we're practicing presence. We're practicing trying to be as present as possible without falling asleep. So what that looks like on a neuroscience standpoint is that your default mode network, which is essentially areas of your brain that make up your thinking mind. But when you're doing critical thinking, these areas of the brain are taking up more oxygen and blood flow, just like as if you were lifting weights in your biceps. You're doing a bicep curl, your biceps take up more oxygen and blood flow. You're creating energy with the biceps. Same thing when you're doing critical thinking. These areas of your mind are taking up more oxygen and blood flow. And same thing's happening when you're having anxiety or in stress. These areas of the brain you've trained it now to behave like this. Now when you're meditating, you're trying to achieve the opposite. You're trying to achieve like a wakefulness, like sleep state. So essentially, decrease oxygen and blood flow to this area of the brain. So you want it to go offline. If you want to be nice, calm, and present, and fully in the moment. So when you're in a psychedelic state, that same exact thing is happening with this area of your brain as if when you're in a meditative state. So you could thus make the argument that you are basically consciously, you're basically consciously consuming consciousness. So because you're trying to enhance your consciousness when you're meditating, so thus you're trying to enhance your consciousness when you're taking psychedelics. So it's a tool to achieve greater presence and greater consciousness in your life. So your awareness should be thus increased from that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Frequently in this podcast we talk about the damage our skin takes when it meets sun rays, UV radiation, and it doesn't have any protection. And I think a few things that you've just mentioned, which are extreme or chronic stress, chronic state of fight or flight, chronic state of heightened awareness, um, that is associated with conditioned conditioned stress. That is another part of health risk, health damaging um, effect, like UV radiation, that we
Yeah.
cannot like put a sunblock on. There's no real sunblock
Yeah.
for that. And obviously, we can talk about, and we have in the past talked about mindfulness as a way to use it as basically as that sunblock, as that stress block. But first of all, this is something that requires a lot of commitment, and
Sure.
sometimes that commitment needs a push. Sometimes this that we need something to help us get an on and off switch. In
Help us get
psychedelics,
out of our own way.
yes, exactly, quite literally, like also
Yeah.
beforehand, and also the act of being in a mindful state is getting
Totally.
out of our own way.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we could be our best friends and we could be our worst enemies. And I think more often than not, people can be their own worst enemies.
yeah, yeah, it is kind of a first world, um, if you look at happiness meters in third world countries and first world countries, a
Hmm.
lot of the times you'll see like an inverse effect than what you would think. Whereas you know,
Totally.
I come from Israel. You have Jewish and Israeli background. That's according to some meters, the happiest country in the world, and obviously it's a country that is experiencing life-threatening events pretty
Hmm.
often. So how do we
Yep.
correlate it and then look at America, with obviously most people not experiencing life-threatening events and they're way more miserable?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did
there's
you?
there's a lot to be said about that because
Mhm.
you guys have a lot more of general like patriotism and you guys are kind of in this together, right? But there is a good example of this is after 9/11. There's overall like a lot of kind of the general like camaraderie and yeah, obviously something horrible happened, but people were
Mhm.
like much more like were much nicer to each other, much more shit with one another, and it was this overall state of kind of like, hey, like we're all in this together. That came from that. The same thing was kind of experienced. I know in England after like when during like the Blitzkrieg
Yeah.
bombings in World War II, so similar kind of thing. It's really amazing. Like that's how how we work as humans. We a little bit of that kind of environmental stress, like can actually be essentially kind of a good thing. What you were saying about like some of these some of the poorest countries in the world are some of the happiest. For a good example, there's the country of Bhutan,
Yes.
in the Himalayas. They have like a ministry of happiness, and they're one of the poorest,
Mhm.
like lowest GDP countries in the entire world. And they're literally, I think, like the number one happiest country in the world. And
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. First of all, Bhutan is a very interesting idea because that's how they measure success, right? It's not
Yeah.
with money or anything like that. It was close to the world for a long time because the monarchy there, did understood. Someone can say that they were wrong, but the bottom line was also Morocco did it for many years beforehand. Japan in between the 1600 to the 1900. All these countries really understood that part of what cultivates happiness or you know misery is comparing yourself to someone else, comparing yourself to some
100%.
average, imaginary average,
100%.
and seeing how you stack up. And it is true. I mean, we don't need to look further than social media and the effects of what happens when you see a lot of depictions of other people having a good time when you're not, or succeeding when you're not, to know it for your even on yourself or your children or whatever that is.
Yeah.
So was that the way you were exposed to psychedelics? Like what was your exposure? How did you get into psychedelics? Was it through that journey of mindfulness?
Yeah. So my first, to be honest, to be totally honest, my first experience with psychedelics, I was 15 years old and I did mushrooms in high school, like an idiot. I had no idea what I was doing, way too much, and just like it had completely bad experience. And you know, rightly so. I should have. I had no idea what I was doing. It wasn't like, in a tribal society where you become, that's about the time when you're becoming a man. Like you'd be taken on a spiritual journey by wise elders, and it's very much like the settings all curated for you. There's none of that, so it was not good. I didn't do them until about maybe 5 years ago, maybe 4.5 years ago. I was I was a lifelong athlete, college football player in a Western medicine household. My old man was from the Soviet Union, came here, $5 in his pocket, made himself into very successful surgeon, very Western kind of minded, oriented, very much into health and fitness. Well, no connection to like Eastern world was called they're hippies, and it's disregarded, right? And I was always kind of interested in like Eastern philosophies and practices, watching like Bruce Lee movies kind of growing up, and just understanding more and more about, Buddhism always kind of spoke to me. And then after I finished playing college football, I had on my 7th reconstructive surgery. Body was basically broken, and my identity was basically over. This person I identified as for so long was gone, and I didn't really know who I was. If that makes sense. So I went through this identity crisis of kind of figuring out who I was, and that's when I started learning about this voice in my head. This one that wanted to shut the fuck up. It was talking nonsense to me, and that kind of drove me into meditation. And I got into meditation and learning, learning about what consciousness is, and kind of having a better relationship with my mind, and overall just kind of learning about how this whole thing works. And that really kind of pushed me in this direction to, compound on what I was already interested in, which was kind of this optimizing this human experience, but much more on a performance standpoint before. And now it's kind of looking at rounding that whole thing out, and it's making a complete, learning more about this complete kind of human experience, and optimizing all of that so we could have we could basically achieve our best self possible. So then when I did psychedelics again, I was on a backpacking trip. It was kind of the first backpacking trip, or I should say second backpacking trip as an adult. I'd done some when I was a kid, and I was on the tip top of the Sierras, literally basically as high as you can go, and had like a massive amount of mushrooms, the right setting, and I was at that point where I had some good breakthroughs in my life, and I had it. I felt like there was still this monkey on my back. A lot of it was kind of stepping out into my own, stepping out of just some other kind of previous identities, and really owning who I am and what I'm about and what my purpose is in this world. And it was amazing. I was able to really look at myself from such an egoless point of view, and laugh, cry, and just have a full kind of clarity of that I'm enough. I'm able to, that I deserve to be happy. I deserve to, trust myself, and put forth what I want to put forth in this world, and not feel the pressures or the fears that I have to conform to whatever it is that society or parents or whatever it might be that wants of me. I should do whatever I want to do because I want to do that. That's what I'm driven to do. Yeah. And that helped me really realize that this is a powerful substance. This is a powerful tool that can really help you along your path. And after that, I discovered microdosing, and discovered that microdosing is basically it's just like it sounds, a micro form of that awareness that I cultivate, I experience day-to-day level. So I'm not inebriated, I'm not high by any means. I'm just heightened. I'm more in tune with my day. I'm more focused. I'm less in my time traveling mind of being in the past or the future. I'm able to be more present. I'm able to see more of the beauties that would maybe bypass that don't do me any service from a survival point of view. I'm able to just overall have a richer, fuller, happier experience that so many people are lacking in this world. The greatest cause for disability in this world now is anxiety and depression, and that's really sad.
Yeah.
It's something that's preventable, if that makes sense. And to see it, psychedelics in their different use cases are just such a powerful tool for humanity that people have been using throughout millennia. And for some reason, this kind of Judeo-Christian society in the past, period of time has basically deemed them as that's something that we shouldn't use it. That's evil, and that it seems that we're kind of correcting our previous mistakes with that right now.
Going back to longevity, beauty, etc., I think what we were talking about today is a way to experience reality in a much healthier way, which would lead, according to every evidence that we have, to a healthier life, a life that is expressing itself by better longevity, better health span, and better, obviously, enjoying life much more, which maybe is the most important. So, Greg, we definitely should do this again. Dive into more specific things, because we went really wide in this episode and kind of. So I would love to have you again and dive deep into specifics. I really appreciate the time that you gave us. We talked somewhat about a specific product, which is called Muse, which is what when you work with clients of yours that you talk about psychedelics, that's kind of the brand that you recommend to them, if I understand correctly. How would people be able to find this brand? How can people follow you? Obviously, we're going to have everything in the show notes, but maybe you can tell a little bit about that.
Yeah, totally. So my buddies over at Muse, they can find them on Instagram at mymuselife .com. It's at mymuselife.com, but on Instagram it's at mymuselife. That's MYMUSELIFE. And then my page, I'm at OFX_coach. Once again, it's at OFX_coach on Instagram. My website is currently under construction again right now, making some tweaks to that. So Instagram is the best place to find me. Send me a DM on there if you got any questions. Happy to answer them and rap with you on different things.
For sure.
Yeah, so I appreciate being on the podcast. Looking forward to more, to kind of scratch the surface of all the things that I'm curious about and passionate about.
Sounds great. All right, Greg, thank you so much, and we will be in touch soon.
All right, my brother. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon.